She's going to sort of MC and run this conversation.
All right, ladies, good morning. So I just want to start out with just a quick little story. Around Christmas time, I was at the dollar store, and my son was there. He's 3 years old, and he starts pulling on my clothing to try and take me somewhere. And I just bent over and I said, "We need to use our words, and you don't pull on mommy's clothing. Use your words, not your hands. Let's try that again." And this older lady came up to me and said, "Wow, it is so nice to see a mom teaching like that to their children." And although I looked at her and said, "Thank you," in my mind, I was like, "You should have seen me this morning, or yesterday, or the day before yesterday, or all of the days. Like, I'm a fraud. Like, this is not the norm. Yes, it's a tool I had, but it's not a tool that I always used." So, and I think that's something that a lot of us can really relate to. We have some of the tools, but we're not always used to executing them all of the time. And you really have to make some effort to do that. So with that being said, I'm really excited about this meeting. If you guys knew some of the background in the planning, you would be kind of in awe to see just how the Lord works within us. So just among our panel, thank you so much for being here. Between all of us, myself included, standing up here, we are parenting 17 children. Because even though some of them are grown, your parenthood journey doesn't completely end. And I think that's amazing. That is a lot of image bearers that we have been entrusted and responsible for. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of jump into the questions and get started. We're really kind of focusing on the idea of, there's times we're going to be overwhelmed, and just what do we do? So we're going to start with the way back, the very beginning. So the first question we'll lead off with is, when you first brought that little one home, and there is a mic there you guys can kind of pass around. When you first brought that little one home, what were some of the ways that you just saw your identity shift from this non-mom to all of a sudden a mom? Go for it.
Well, I think your identity does shift. All of a sudden there's somebody who's totally dependent on you, and you haven't had that before. So that is a big shift. But there's something about being a mother that makes you just melt into that. And even though your identity is different for a while, it's a season in your life where it will be different. And things will change, and you'll go to another season where it won't be like that. So I think you do find that you do have an identity that changes a little bit with that little one, because they're so dependent on you.
Anybody else have any other comments?
We want to know.
And you can kind of add to that, as it shifted, how did you balance some of that new identity with kind of some of who you were before, or still really are, I guess?
Okay. I had a difficult transition to motherhood. Apparently I thought I was terribly cool before I became a mom. And then I was thinking, ugh, mom, like I am not going to drive a minivan, which I've now had one for 12 years. And I'm certainly, like, an old man held the door open for me when I just had my baby and was like, "Here you go, mama." And I was like, oh, I am more than just a mama. But through the years, I feel like I've come to embrace that because moms are amazing. But it was really difficult for me, and I felt like, what's wrong with me? Like, I love this kid, but I don't love being a mom. And I think part of it was I didn't know what to expect, and part of it is I didn't realize how selfish I was. Because like Diane said, to have someone completely dependent on you in every way, it's exhausting in a way that you had never imagined before you became a mom. And then when you add additional children to that, I think the exhaustion is exponential. And you do kind of grow into your definition of motherhood and find your identity in that, but it's just a shift that you can't understand. I would think most of you would feel the same way until you become a mom. And then there's emotions to deal with, like anger that we're going to get to, that you never experienced in the same way until you became a mom?
I think I was really ill-prepared for the transition. I maybe had more of a whimsical idea about what having a baby and motherhood, and then being in labor a long time and having a C-section. It's not like today, where things are adjusted and looked at differently. And we were also in a missionary training facility, and we had no running water in our apartment. So and we were in the process of moving to a new apartment when our first son was born. So my husband had to finish everything, and I came home. I like things very much in order, and so you bring a new baby home and it's things aren't the way I would have put them together. There's no running water. Fortunately, we were next door to the utility room, so you had to carry a bucket to get you do your dishes and everything. So all of that kind of complicated the whole idea for me, and I don't know that I thought much about this transition. I was just so busy living, and it wasn't exactly what I expected, but underneath, like everyone has said, underneath all of that, motherhood does kick in, and this love you have for your child takes over, even in the most difficult conditions and situations.
I remember being surprised at how easily taking care of the baby came to me. As far as like, I just sort of knew what to do, and they say that will kick in, you'll just know, and I just did, and I was surprised. I was really young when I had Paul, so I was surprised. But I think that was the first of all the surprises. I expect to be like shaping him, and it turned out that he was shaping me. And that's the biggest surprise, I think, when I became a mother, because you think like, okay, like my time is stopping, and I'm stopping, I'm gonna stop growing, I'm gonna grow this person, but really like they're growing you. So that was the first like massive surprise that came with my little baby.
And so, as you heard a lot of times here, they use the word expectancy, and I think that's why I started with the question of identity, is the fact that a lot of times we expect it to be one way, and then when it's not, it seems very reflective of us. And I think that begins the first phase of, why are you acting this way? I'm so embarrassed, or whatever, because it's you feel like it's a complete reflection. Their misbehaviors are a complete reflection of this new identity that you have. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about specific misbehaviors, but all of a sudden those become very personal to you, not just isolated instances. So that kind of leads us to our next questions. Babies, they're there, and it's really the toddler years where their personalities start to pop up. And so I'm just going to ask, are there any specific behaviors that you can remember that just caused you to react, kind of that explosive reaction of either frustration, and maybe it's not explosive, maybe it's inside, you're like, and you're not a reactive person on the outside, so it could be either way. Any of those specific behaviors where you just could not believe they would do that, or you could not believe that you would do that?
Do we have all day? Oh my gosh, as you were talking, this memory of Paul at 3 years old came to mind, and he had a Hot Wheel, and he just ran it up some stranger's car. Like this. I was like, what are you doing? Yeah, I was thinking about that. I don't remember how I reacted. Which says a lot, because we probably both blocked it out. I'm like hyperventilating right now, thinking about it. He's 20.
I don't know if there's, especially with our first child, I mentioned this 2 years ago. I was looking at some notes when I spoke at MOPS, that when a former strong-willed child gives birth to a strong-willed child, you can expect battles, and there was. We had a battle of the wills. I mean, it wasn't just one thing, it was everything. To give you an example, at night, you know, the whole thing, putting him to bed, we were memorizing verses, we sang, we prayed, we read to them. He would come out every single night. And I was listening, happened to be driving in the car and listening to Focus on the Family, and James Dobson had the book, The Strong-Willed Child, which I thought he must have written for me. But he talked about bedtime. And so we told him he could not turn the light on because his little brother was asleep, who just was the total opposite, was the completely compliant child. So we told him he could not come out of the room. You know, he couldn't turn the light on, it wasn't playtime. He could sit on his bed in the dark if he wanted to. Well, every night we found him with his pillow on the threshold of his room. He would push it as far as he could. And so, but that, giving him that boundary worked. And he knew there would be a consequence if he came out of the room. So he never came out of the room, but every night, there he was with his pillow right in the doorway, like saying, I'm taking this as far as I can go. He's turned out, he's really...
Worked out for him?
Yeah, worked out for him.
Well, as Jessica was saying, that the kids sometimes just refine us, I think, as we go, because I was telling her, we were talking about this panel, Jessica and I, we were talking about, I said, well, I just kind of forget all these things from when the kids were little, you know? Well, blacked out, I'm just, you know, forget that. And she said, well, you probably looked like to me like someone who never yelled at your kid. And I'm like, not. And I was telling her that I was reading back over some of my journals from when the kids were little, and right in there you could see, today I was yelling so hard at the kids and stuff, but it didn't even need to say why exactly I was yelling or why I was angry, but they do refine us, because my next statement then was, so I went in and apologized to the kids, and they looked at me and they said, you know, Mom, you shouldn't be apologizing to me, you should be apologizing to God. You're absolutely right. You know, they see things that, you know, and they were probably like 4 and 5, you know, and I'm like, you're right, you know. So, I mean, there are times that you're always going to lose it and stuff, but the kids are going to teach you what you need to be looking at inside of yourself. So,
I think as far as specific triggers for me, I have a little problem being on time. I just waltzed in here at 9:15. I had a problem before I had kids, so adding 4 kids to that mix does not help. So it seems like when we have to be somewhere at a certain time, still to this day, every morning going to school, but especially when they were little, I would be like, how can you only have 1 shoe? I don't understand. There were, you know, we have 18 million shoes by the door. You can find 2 that match. Surely, put them on your feet and get in the car. So I feel like any kind of, not high pressure situations, just being on time is high pressure to me. Those are triggers for me. But then also, like when I look back, I'm trying to think, you know, was there certain things that happened, like if the kids were super whiny, or if somebody had a temper tantrum, and I don't remember that being it so much, as I think it was just sometimes the cumulative effect, like the building up for a few days, times 4 kids, of like disobedience, some whining, and then I think also the more unappreciated I felt, like the shorter my fuse got. And I usually was like a ticking time bomb. I'd go and make it through the day, being a semi-decent mother, and then when my husband would get home, it was on. Like the next thing, kaboom. Like I just wanted someone to know, look how hard I've been working, look how patient I've been, and now I'm gonna throw this loaf of bread against the wall. And so for me, sorry, I married her compliant son. So her very good guy
So
son.
he cleaned up the bread.
So, no, he just calmly is like, why don't you go to the bathroom for a while? Go outside this house until all bread is safe. And so, for me, sometimes it was more of a cumulative thing than one specific trigger behavior.
one thing my sister, a piece of advice that she gave me, and really, these are principles. It's no 12-step program to getting to being the perfect mom and not losing your cool, but she observed my interaction, let's say, with my first son. And growing up, she was always the peacemaker, and she's very laid back and very loving. And she said to me, and to me at the time it was revolutionary. She said, "Why don't you pick your battles?" Because for me, it was, he and I locked horns on every issue. It was getting in the car. It was what was he going to wear? What 2 or 3-year-old cares about what he's going to wear? What he's going to wear, how he's going to do this, where we're going. It's just, everything. There was a battle. So, her advice was concentrate on a couple of areas and not look at this big picture all the time. And then one other thing that my husband, as we were talking about this, it reminded me that good planning disarms confrontation. And if you plan ahead, and the more that I did, give them, like we're leaving in 10 minutes, like when you're with friends or family, because we always just, okay, let's go, and we're pulling the kids, and I realize I'm rushing everywhere. I'm rushing them in the car. I'm rushing them to get dressed. I'm rushing them to go to church. I'm rushing them just everywhere. So as much as we can put that into practice, that helps as well.
I love that response. And I think too, as maybe you only have one child, maybe you're expecting a second, is their personalities are going to be different, so your battles are going to be different, and therefore your plans are going to be different. And I just think that's huge in your preparation. I think probably the biggest takeaway so far. Now, as you started to plan and realize kind of what maybe your reactions weren't exactly what they should be, how did you change from a reaction to a response? So what could we kind of put in our tool belt as actual, like, tangible words that you would say to your toddler or even your older kids? Some of us don't just have toddlers, some of us have older kids. So if you could think of any actual responses that you gave to certain scenarios that were gentle responses.
Well, the one time, out of the 17 that she named, like, I have 6 of them at my house. And it's sort of like parental whiplash for me, and I do have the older kids, teenage girls specifically, that I'm thinking of right now, who can mimic a toddler, What shifted, and my daughter and I were talking about it the other day, because I could think of one, like, glaring instance where I got it wrong. And this was after I've been a mom for like 17 years, like, there's no excuse. I just got it wrong, like the twins. However, I will say I've never been a mom of multiples. And that's a game changer, right, Sarah? Right? Totally new motherhood there. So I'd never been a mom of multiples, but there was one day that I'm thinking of, and they were like, I don't even know what they were doing, because I overshadowed them. All I can remember is my response to them, and I was like screaming. Like, I lost my mind, psychomaniac. So everyone else feel better about what you do at home, because it was like almost out of body for me. Like, I was watching myself act like a maniac to these 2 4-year-olds. And I'm trying not to cry right now, because I can remember my daughter's face. Like, there was a moment of clarity where I looked at her. That's the karma of, like, behaving badly, because you remember it and they don't. Like, they're very forgiving. But I look at her and her face is, like, scared of me. Like, really, she's, like, sitting back quietly, meek, like, sinking in, like, please don't, like, erupt and burst into flames is probably what she thought. And they just didn't know what to do. And I won that day. I won the temper tantrum war, because mine was, like, way worse than theirs. And I don't even remember what they did. And I apologized, and I told them, sorry, Mom, you shouldn't act that way. And I tried to like show them what making it right was like. And that was a time when I just got it wrong, and thank God they're forgiving. And their memory isn't as good as mine. And then there's my daughter who's 15, and she and I were talking about a time, you know, in her life that was difficult, and she really deserved punishment. Really bad. And she was in 8th grade, and I picked her up from school one day early, and I had done like really some deep soul searching on this girl because I knew I could react to her. I needed to respond to her, where she was at, because she needed a mother to be in it with her, not against her. So I picked her up from school that day, and I asked her the other day, I was like, what do you remember about that? Because it was really a pivotal moment in her life, and how do you remember? And she was like, I remember you picked me up from school, and I was really scared because her dad and I are divorced, that you were so mad at me, and I was gonna have to go live with my dad. Like, you had enough. And I was like, oh, what else do you remember? Because it didn't work out that way. And she was like, then I remember you pulled into an ice cream shop. And I felt like, what are we doing here? I was really confused. And then we got ice cream, and you sat down with me outside, and she was like, I just looked at you, and she said, I expected you to be angry, because you deserve to be angry, but you were so, and she used this word, kind. And you met me where I was at, and I didn't feel like you were against me. And she's like, I actually didn't even feel like I deserved to eat the ice cream. And she was like, that's what I remember. Like, you were in it with me, and you were gonna help me navigate out. And so I think that's a time I got it right. But that was the harder thing to do, because I wanted to react, and she deserved like for me to react. But it was like a godly response to her sinful nature. And it was the kindness that drew her back to repentance. If I would have overreacted, she would not be where she is today. So that took a little longer than I thought. But it was two drastically different times.
There were so many times that I did not react the right way, and I had no plan of how to react. I think I was reacting out of exhaustion most of the time. I like my sleep, and I wasn't getting sleep a lot of times. And then working outside of the home on top of it, there were days where I thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown just trying to keep up with everything. But one of the things that really was a trigger for me was when the kids would whine, and I just hated that. And somehow I ended up with a plan for that one. And they knew, I would say, as soon as I saw it coming, you know, if you're gonna whine, the answer for whatever you are gonna want is no. And I would say that every time when it started to creep in, you know, if you're doing this, the answer is gonna be no. And so pretty soon they got to the point where they, you know, think about it or say, I know, no whining, or the answer's gonna be no. You know, they knew that was gonna be the consistent response. So just being, you know, consistent with something, there were so many times I wasn't, but that was one time where they kind of learned that no whining, not gonna happen, so.
What was the question? Just any specific example of how you took a previous reaction and then were able to actually learn a new response, a gentle.
Okay, I want to say, okay, I got nothing, and just pass the mic. I really do feel a little bit hypocritical being up here because I feel like this is an area where God must be like a little slow in the uptake on me because we've been working on this for 14 years. I'm still not there. But I do think He uses our kids to sanctify us, whether we realize He's working on us or not. And sometimes we do well, and sometimes we don't. And I feel like I have not done very well with this. One thing that has helped a little bit is to talk about expectations ahead of time. And so if you know there's a time, like if they have a meltdown.
That song is okay, is all right with me.
Okay. Like if they meltdown in stores, like to say before going in, now remember, you know, this is what I expect. Because a lot of my anger was when they wouldn't act up to my expectations, but they didn't necessarily know what they were. Ditto with my husband. So it helps to go ahead and put your expectations out there. And then as far as like the whining, it would drive me crazy if my kids like did not appreciate things, which hello, their kids, unrealistic expectations, but especially if I felt like I was so nice.
I don't know.
And it's a random way to hold my phone. And they still weren't appreciating it. So one time, just out of sheer frustration, I made up this silly story about like this nest full of baby birds. And every day the mommy and daddy bird would fly out and bring them back seeds to eat. And there would be black seeds and gray seeds and yellow seeds and orange seeds, and they were so delicious. And then the mommy and daddy bird worked so hard to bring back these yummy seeds, but the baby chicks just said, we want purple seeds, we want purple seeds. And so they loved this story. And then the first time I told her, I was so mad at them. And so finally the mommy just said, too bad, we don't have any purple seeds. And she pushed them out of the nest and they all fell to the ground. And I'm like, Mom! So I had to change the ending. But it has helped. It obviously brought some levity to the situation, which was needed, and humor has been really helpful in our house to just kind of help us to reset, to defuse my anger. And I can say to them sometimes, like if they're acting this way, I'll just be like, we want purple seeds, and it makes them stop and think. So that's all I got is the bird story.